Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 1st around here, and we got a lot of stuff to get to. It was a huge weekend in the world of college football, and a lot of it happened on Sunday. And we got to start with that. We got to start with all the coaching carousel stuff. We will start with Lane Kiffin to LSU. That was what I predicted on Wednesday. It took a couple twists and turns before we ended up getting there, but he is the new head coach of LSU. We'll talk about Pete Golding taking his place. Florida makes a hire. Auburn, Arkansas, Michigan State, Kentucky getting close to making a hire. UCLA makes one. And what is Penn State doing? We'll talk about all of that to start off the show. Then we got some big game reactions. We got Ohio State obviously winning the game for first time since 2019. Alabama escapes in the Iron Bowl, and probably the game of the day if I had to say on Saturday. Texas upsets Texas A&M in the Lone Star Showdown, a huge one for Texas that didn't have a ton of CFP implications. And then we'll talk about Miami and Vanderbilt taking care of business before we get to a little bit of a whip around. We'll talk about Georgia Tech. Ole Miss gets a win. Now a more uncertain future ahead of them. Oregon handles business. And then chaos in the ACC. And we'll give you guys an idea of what we got in the store in Conference Championship weekend. Some great games coming up this weekend. But we got to jump in. And you know where we have to start. Lane Kiffin is the new head coach of the LSU Tigers. The saga has officially come to an end. He will not coach Ole Miss in the playoff or going forward the rest of this season. That was crazy. That was college football pretty much to an absolute T. It was very out in the open. Lane Kiffin stoked the fire just a little bit, and we'll talk about all of that here in a second. But overall, it was a little bit annoying at times. It was very long. It was a little bit confusing. It kept Marty Smith essentially hostage in Oxford, Mississippi for probably longer than he wanted to be there. But at the end of the day, Lane Kiffin is now the head coach of the LSU Tigers, and he has left Ole Miss with a number of staffers with him. We're still trying to figure out exactly who that is. But don't love the way this was handled. I don't think I'm part of the minority there. I think most people don't love the way this was handled. I think there's certain things that Lane would probably do a little bit differently. But the other part of that is when you're Lane Kiffin and the two main schools that were kind of pursuing him throughout this were LSU and Florida, it was going to be very hard to make this quiet. It was going to be very hard to make this something that just kind of went as normal, didn't have any bells and whistles, didn't have any craziness, especially when the governor of Louisiana got involved. It was always going to be a little bit messy. I think Lane made it a little bit more messy than it had to be. Obviously, the stories coming out over the last 24 hours about how he was getting on a plane and he said, if you don't get on that plane with me, you don't have a job at LSU. All of that stuff is reports and, allegeds, and we don't know exactly how this went down. We do know it got a little bit contentious and a little bit weird and a little bit messy. At the end of the day, they've come to a conclusion. It was going to be a little bit all over the place. I think there was no other way that Lane Kiffin hiring, especially with LSU and Florida involved, was going to go. That's just the way college football is. But don't love the way that all of this unfolded. I don't know if Lane loves all of it as well. But regardless, the people that saying in this entire weekend that were saying Lane Kiffin should be able to coach this team through the postseason, and he's done everything for this football team, that he has to be able to ride it out, think about the players, that's outright insane. I really do mean that. If he was going to the NFL, absolutely. He should coach the rest of the season. He should be able to ride off into the sunset with his guys, see the season through. He's making a decision not to go to another NFL team, not to go to another college team. He's deciding to go to LSU. He's deciding to go to a team that Ole Miss fans outside of Mississippi State hate more than anyone else in the entire world. You can't let that guy coach your football team. I get it. Maybe some of the players wanted to keep him around. I understand why some of the players wanted to keep him around. I understand why he wanted to be there. You can't let that happen if you're Keith Carter. You have to be able to set the line somewhere and say, if you're not going to be here with us, you aren't going to coach this football team, because here's the reality. The idea that he would be able to be fully involved in the Ole Miss CFP run while coaching LSU is just not possible. He might think that's possible. It is physically impossible for him to do the things that he was going to have to do for LSU and still coach Ole Miss the way that he has all season. that wasn't going to be on the table. It is a very good decision by Ole Miss to get him out that door to LSU and start this new era. We'll talk about Pete Golding here in a second, but overall, I think Ole Miss and Keith Carter made the absolute right decision. Even if you lose in the first round of the playoff, I still believe that's the right decision, even if you don't look remotely like the same team. And that's something we'll talk about more tomorrow when we get into the CFP hypotheticals and what's going to happen on Tuesday with the rankings. But it's going to be a different team. I feel pretty confident in that. Regardless, you can't let this guy coach this team going into the postseason, and he's not going to. As for the hire for LSU, all of the craziness out of the way, as for the hire, is the best one they could have realistically made. I don't think they were getting Steve Sarkisian. I don't think they were getting Kirby Smart. I know for a fact they weren't getting Nick Saban. So I think this was the guy that you were realistically going to be able to get, and you were able to get him. Maybe Dan Lanning, but I don't think that was realistically on the table. So you nailed it. In terms of the open candidates that made sense, I think this is the very best guy you can get. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It was a decision between, do I want to be a legend, do I want to be a king of my own castle over here at Ole Miss, or do I want a shot to be one of the best 5 or 10 best head coaches in college football history? He took the latter. I believe he has the capability of pulling that off at LSU. There's a lot of things that need to be figured out over there at LSU for that to happen. Doesn't mean it was the right or wrong choice. That is entirely the way you look at it. Lane looked at it as a chance to become a living legend in the world of college football, and I totally understand that. From a pure which job is better perspective, LSU's the better job. It has a better recruiting footprint. It has a more history of success. I think you can put together 5 straight years of what he's done in 2 years over there at Ole Miss, or really this year. I think that is something you can do for 5 or 6 years in a row at LSU. I don't know that that's the same case at Ole Miss. Now, for Ole Miss, this will not be maybe your only shot to do this. Everyone keeps telling you this is the only shot you have. You got to let Lane coach this thing. Don't let people tell you that. Ole Miss has done really incredible things over the last little bit. Obviously, Lane Kiffin has a massive, massive thing to do with that, but it doesn't mean you're going anywhere. It doesn't mean you're absolutely getting buried. It means things are changing, and you got a lot of tough decisions to make, and you're going to have a hard job in front of you this offseason and going forward the rest of the next couple of seasons. But I think everything worked out probably the way it was supposed to. As upsetting as this is for Ole Miss fans, because that's the best coach you've ever had. Period. End of story. It doesn't mean you're falling off a cliff. It's going to be harder to stay on that. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be harder to stay atop this SEC throne, stay in the CFP conversation. But we'll see what happens. For now, they go to Oxford, Mississippi next year. Lane Kiffin and LSU go to Oxford, Mississippi, and frankly, I don't think Lane Kiffin and those coaches are going to be the only ones returning. I think there's going to be plenty of players that after this playoff run find their way over to Baton Rouge, and that's going to be an atmosphere. I can tell you that much. I am a Texas fan, so I'm telling you right now, when Chris Beard went over to Texas Tech after he left, it was nasty, and it's going to be nasty maybe times 10 over there in Oxford when they do come around, and we will talk about that when it does come. In terms of the staff that he fills around him, going to be massively important. It sounds like Blake Baker is sticking around, which is the biggest domino you needed to fall. The rest of it is making sure you keep some of the really talented kids like PJ Woodland, like all of the really talented young defensive players, mainly defensive players, that need to be on your team moving forward. We'll see what he does the rest of the way. I think they'll dip into the portal. I think they have a really good roster if they can keep some of those guys around. At the end of it all, Lane Kiffin is now the coach of LSU. Ole Miss moves forward, and it's going to be Pete Golding. It's going to be Pete Golding taking over for Ole Miss, not only for the CFP, but moving forward. He is the permanent head coach over there at Ole Miss. And this both makes sense to me, and I have massive questions about the long-term success that he can achieve there. It's really about keeping that staff and that roster intact going into 2026 because there's a lot of really talented kids, especially young kids on that defense, that if they were able to come back, you can put together a good season in 2026. If a couple of staffers were to come back, the Charlie Weiss Jr. situation is still seems to be up in the air, whether or not he's in Baton Rouge or Oxford. I don't know how, but we'll see what happens there. If they can keep some of that staff around, then you're in a much better place. So I totally get this decision. I think Pete Golding's a very, very good coach. He's done a lot better in a lot of ways than I thought he was going to do over there at Ole Miss as the defensive coordinator. We'll see what the long-term impacts of this are, how long he can kind of keep this rolling. But in terms of making this decision right now, I think it's a good one. I think it makes this team rally around this guy. I think it makes this staff at least stay as intact as you could possibly hope with losing your head coach. And you have a guy that obviously really cares about Ole Miss and wants to be there because he could be on a plane to Baton Rouge right now, but he's in Oxford getting ready for a playoff, and we'll see what happens with that. Again, something we'll talk about more tomorrow. But solid hire, definitely one I'm more skeptical of in the long term, but in the short term, it makes absolute sense for Ole Miss. This is the other big one. Florida hires John Sumrall. This one kind of made me mad, and not because I think this is a bad hire in any sense of the word. You Florida fans, and I don't try to attack fan bases in any sense. I think fan bases are their own thing. Obviously, there's bad parts, there's great parts, whatever. Every fan base has a weird dichotomy about it. But the thick-headedness to be so mad about this hire because he's a G5 guy from Louisiana is ridiculous. I understand. You got a G5 guy last time around. He was at Louisiana. It wasn't all that great. I understand all of that. John Sumrall is really good at what he does. John Sumrall, when you ask people about John Sumrall, the names that you will hear are Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, the guys that are so obsessed with being great every single day, that are so obsessed with getting that one tiny advantage, that one tiny opening, that they will do whatever it takes to make sure their team is in a position to win. That's what this guy is. That's what Florida needs. Florida needs, for lack of a better term, a psycho. They need someone that is so detail-oriented that they can take on a Kirby Smart and not be totally outcoached because they're not prepared for certain things. He is going to be prepared for just about everything. I can almost promise you that. The offensive staff questions are totally fair. Absolutely something he's going to have to figure out. I think he'll bring over some people from Tulane. I'd be surprised if he brought over the entire staff from Tulane. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. I think he's going to be encouraged to go out and get maybe a Buster Faulkner from Georgia Tech or some other offensive coordinator to kind of run that ship while he handles the defense and is a head coach, which is very tough to do when you're calling and doing all of the other stuff that has to be done. But those are fair questions, obviously something that he has to figure out. My take on this is very, very simple. If he is giving the backing from the administration that I have questions about Scott Strickland and that athletic director and how long he's going to be there, but regardless, if he gets the backing from the administration that he needs and the fan base that he needs, and I'm talking to all Florida fans right now, if you are willing to give him the backing that he should get and really deserves in a lot of ways, there's no question that he will be successful. I feel very confident in that. If he is given the prerequisite money, the prerequisite resources, and the prerequisite buy-in from everyone involved with that Florida program, he is going to do incredible things there. There's no question about that to me. Will he get that is a massive question to me, and we'll figure out that over time. But at the end of the day, I don't think you could have made a better hire unless you hired Lane Kiffin. I get being upset that you didn't get Lane Kiffin. This is a very, very good head coach that if you didn't get him, you're probably going to watch him do incredible things over at Auburn or somewhere else that was going to be competing with you. We'll see what happens going forward. I think it's a great long-term hire. In terms of the short term, it's about can you keep Jaden Baugh, Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, and all the other talented young players in Gainesville? And if you can't, can you get other guys? It's going to be a heavy lift in year one. I have no doubts about that. They're going to play a tough schedule. They're going to have a lot of things working against them. This is a very talented head coach. And if he's given the time and the resources, he can do remarkable things down there in Gainesville. Auburn hires Alex Golesh. That kind of opened the door for Auburn to have a decision to make, and I think they nailed it. I really do. I think Alex Golesh is a great, great hire. The question I do have is with that offense, and it's not to say the offense isn't good, it isn't explosive, it can't do incredible things. We saw what it did in 2022 at Tennessee. I think he's going to have to evolve it just a little bit. I think he's going to have to change it, and I think he's going to have quite a bit of work to do on the roster. I think they're going to have quite a few guys transfer out of there. Now, maybe he'll be able to get in front of them and convince them to stay. I think you're going to lose quite a few guys. If you can keep Deuce Knight in that room, you'll be in pretty good shape. Now, obviously, you need playmakers around him. You need to replace quite a few guys that are going to the NFL or elsewhere on the offensive line. There are plenty of things that still need to be done. That's your number one priority, as far as I'm concerned. Cam Coleman, obviously, very far up there, and a number of other guys that you want to see stay in Auburn. I think you're going to lose some guys. I think this is a long-term great hire, and I think it gives you a shot to do what a Hugh Freeze did back in the day, or what some of these coaches that have been really successful at Auburn have done. A fun, fast offense with playmakers on the defensive side that really cause havoc. I think he's capable of pulling that off. Again, it'll come down to the staff. That's the biggest thing that we're going to talk about every time that a head coaching job is or head coaching hire is made. How do they fill out their staff? If they fill out their staff well, they can do incredible things. A lot of guys miss with that, especially coming from the G5 to the Power 4 level. We'll see. But Auburn absolutely hired a guy that I think has the upward mobility to get them to the top of the conference and get them to CFPs. It'll just be a little bit tougher of a lift as far as I'm concerned going into 2026. Arkansas has hired Ryan Silverfield. This is about as good as Arkansas could do. I don't mean to be rude here. In fact, Ryan Silverfield, fine hire. Really a guy that's won a lot at Memphis, done some really, really great things. Here's the reality. Your athletic director put you in a terrible spot when he was talking about this job, and he essentially just said, we don't have the money to let our football team succeed at the level that they should. Maybe that's changed, and hopefully that's changed. If it hasn't, Ryan Silverfield will do probably what Sam Pittman did. If it's changed, then he can do incredible things there. There's no doubt about that. That comes down to Arkansas's administration. That really doesn't come down to Ryan Silverfield as much as Arkansas fans might want it to. It comes down to the people above him. They haven't been in order over the last couple of years. I don't know if they'll get in order now. I know if they do, Ryan Silverfield can do some really cool things. If they don't, I don't know if he has much of a shot here. That's just kind of the reality of the Arkansas job right this second. Kentucky has fired Mark Stoops. It sounds like they're zeroing in on 2 or 3 guys that they could be watching, but this was a little shocking to me. I didn't expect Kentucky to pull the trigger here and just get involved in this coaching cycle, especially this late in the process, but they did, and they owe him $37 million over the next 60 days, and we'll see what happens from there. It sounds like Will Stein is the favorite as of right now. Would be a great hire. Sounds like Brian Hartline is also involved in this one. We'll talk about him in a second here, but at the end of the day, great hire. If you get Will Stein, former Louisville quarterback, actually, weirdly enough, so that'll be a fun wrinkle there. Dan Mullen has also been brought up for this job. I think he might be waiting for something a little bit bigger, but who knows? There's definitely a world where he gets involved in this one, but at the end of the day, makes total sense. If they end up getting Will Stein, I think you nailed it. If you get someone else, I don't know. It's just a weird position to be in. I think Kentucky was going to make this decision at some point. You might as well get it out of the way early, and if you bring in Will Stein, I think you nailed it, and you can do some really fun things over the next couple of years. Michigan State has fired Jonathan Smith and has hired Pat Fitzgerald. This is a big one, and they nailed the hire. There's no doubt about that. Michigan State has been a program and a team that I think a lot of us have just been waiting on, to kind of kick into gear. I thought Jonathan Smith was going to do it. I really was a big Jonathan Smith guy coming in. I think this is a perfect fit for them because I don't know where Michigan State fits in the new era of the Big Ten with new teams coming in, with NIL, with transfer portal. I think you're going to need a guy that can do more with less. Pat Fitzgerald can absolutely do that. A very weird finish to his time at Northwestern. Kind of got railroaded in a little bit, in a sense, late on his time there. Everything has been squared away. I think you nailed it. If you're Michigan State, we'll see how that develops. Again, Michigan State's one of those jobs kind of like Kentucky, kind of like Arkansas, where you just got to get the backing from the people behind you or you're playing from behind already. So we'll see what happens here. I think it's a great hire in terms of doing less or doing more with less, exactly what Michigan State's going to have to do going forward. UCLA has hired Bob Chesney. This has been talked about for a very long time. Frankly, I think they signed this thing last week and they were just getting their ducks in a row. Nailed it. I'll be totally honest. This might be one of them second or third favorite hire of the entire cycle. They nailed this one. I think this guy is an absolute star, and I think he brings an offense to the table that can get UCLA to a place where at least they're interesting, where at least they're competing in these games, they're fighting for spots, and they're a desirable spot for transfer portal guys, for young players that maybe aren't getting the opportunities from other big Power 4 places because of transfer portal guys. So I think this is a great hire. I think this is a guy that can do incredible things over there. He will coach JMU in a possible postseason. If that's the playoff, if that's a bowl game, talk about that tomorrow with the ACC chaos that went on. But overall, I think you nailed it. I think Penn State was pushing for this guy for a little bit, and then they got a little bit distracted with some bigger fish. I think UCLA got a massive guy here in. We'll see if Jerry Neuheisel sticks around. I'd be a little bit surprised, but who knows? Bob Chesney is a great coach. Cannot wait to see what he can do at UCLA. And then what is Penn State doing? Probably the biggest question in the world of college football right now is, what is Penn State doing? They have just watched 6 or 7 hires be made over the last 24 to 48 hours, and I don't know where they are. I really don't. Now, there's a couple of names. Kalani Sitake is probably the name. As of right this second, he seems to be the new favorite in this one. And there are some great things about Kalani Sitake. I can't imagine this is what Penn State fans had in mind when they fired James Franklin. I can't imagine this is something that they thought was going to happen, is that Kalani Sitake was going to be the number one choice for them. But here's what I can say about Kalani Sitake. He's going to win the margins. He's going to win the turnover battle. He's going to win the penalty battle most times out of 10. He's going to run the ball very effectively. He's going to possess the ball at a very high level. Those are the things that you really need to do, especially in those massive games where you play an Ohio State team. You're not going to be as talented, plain and simple. Now, you shouldn't have a massive gap either, but you're not going to be as talented. So you have to win the margins. He's been incredible at doing that. He's also been at BYU for a really long time, has always coached on the West Coast. I don't know. I have massive questions about that one. I do know on Saturdays, there's very few guys that do their job better than Kalani Sitake. So I wouldn't hate the hire. I'll be very blunt about this one. I think the hire is Brian Hartline. I think you have the hire right in front of you. Whether or not he wants to take it, I suppose, is up for debate. But if you can get that guy there, I think you can build something special. I think you can build what Ohio State has. I think you can recruit at a very high level on the offensive side of the ball. I think you will bring really high-level staffers that have a lot of respect in the industry over there to Penn State. I think that's your guy. There's talk about Brian Daboll. There's talk about them trying to steal Josh Heupel from Tennessee. I don't think either of those are going to happen. If you had to make me pick right now, I think it's going to be Kalani Sitake. I'd hire Brian Hartline. I'd do everything I can to get Brian Hartline in my program. I think he can take you to the next level. Obviously, there's questions about how late he's going to be coaching, what he can do for Penn State. All of those definitely have to factor into this conversation. But if you want a coach that I think will have you a national championship contender in 5 years, I believe Brian Hartline is that guy. We'll see what happens the rest of the way. I'm not sure if Pat Kraft knows what he's doing right this second, but we'll see. We'll see if Penn State can pull it all together. At the end of it all, we still have some openings, and we just got Tulane and South Florida and Memphis. 3 jobs that are massively coveted in the Group of 5 space. There's tons of offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators around the Power 4. There's great coordinators, or there's great just head coaches at the Group of 5 and FCS level that could find their way up. We'll figure all this out. As it unfolds, we'll figure all this out, but a lot of jobs were closed this weekend. Couple more opened, and we will cover them as they do. The main one, Lane Kiffin, off to LSU, and I think this is the beginning of the craziness around that saga and around that rivalry, but we'll get to that as it comes over the next couple of years. For now, we got to talk about football, so we'll take a little bit of a break here, then we come back and we got to talk about the big games from this past weekend. Ohio State breaks the drought. Alabama escapes in the Iron Bowl. A&M gets upset by Texas, and a couple more things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the coaching carousel. It went crazy yesterday. I think we had 6 hires yesterday. We have another one in the SEC that needs to be hired over there in Kentucky. Could be Will Stein, could be a couple other guys. We'll see how that one develops, but it's getting wild. It's getting as wild and maybe even more wild than we thought it was going to coming into this season, but we got to get to the games. We got to get to what happened in between the white lines because that's the important part. As we get closer to the CFP, that's what will affect the next couple of weeks. And this one was This one went the way that I thought it was going to go, except for the beginning of this football game. There were a couple of questions that I had coming into this one. Ohio State wins 27-9 over Michigan. Pretty comfortable win here. They win the game for the first time since 2019, and they do it the way they've done it all year, dominating fashion, controlling just about every aspect of this game for the vast majority of the game, including the postgame. I don't know what Michigan was doing there. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I don't know why you're planning out plans for when you lose. All of that's ridiculous to me. But at the end of the day, that was tough. That was tough. But at the end of the day, we'll leave that where it is for the time being. I have a question about Michigan, and this is an overarching question I've had pretty much the entirety of the year. What are they doing with Bryce Underwood? And this isn't my place, they know way more about football than I do. They've seen way more of Bryce Underwood than I have, all of that good stuff. This guy came in as a 5-star prospect. He came in with a lot of hype, with a lot of money in his pocket, and all of that stuff played a factor into this season for Michigan. Here's the reality. That kid's not all the way there yet. In terms of being a high-level quarterback, going through his reads, ripping the ball when it's open, making the high-level throws, he is not quite there yet. The thing he does have is he's 6'5", and he can run probably a 4.6 at the absolute worst. I didn't see that very much this year. Overall, I didn't see that nearly as much as I should have. They were productive at running back. It's not to say the run game wasn't productive. It just felt like Bryce Underwood was put into an offense that wasn't created for Bryce Underwood. And I really don't understand why, especially in a game where there was no way Michigan was winning this game unless Bryce Underwood was special. They didn't even give him a chance to be special. It's so frustrating to watch that unfold. I don't know what's going to happen the rest of the way. I know they know more about Bryce Underwood than I do. I know they know more about football than I do. I just found it very, very odd that you have a 6'5" absolute specimen of a human and you're just not letting him use his athleticism nearly as much as you probably should. I get it. He's worth a lot of money, but you got to win football games. But regardless, I had two questions about Ohio State. Let's move to Ohio State here really quickly. I had two questions coming into this football game. I had two things that possibly could trip Ohio State up, not only in this game, but moving forward throughout the rest of the season. Number one, do they have a run game that can do enough in these massive moments against these elite defensive lines to give them big-time wins? Second, if they get punched in the mouth and someone makes a mistake early in the football game, how will they bounce back? They answered both the questions. They didn't answer one of them. They answered both of them because Julian Sain throws a pick. On the second throw of the game, he throws a pick, and he didn't look back. He was absolutely perfect. The rest of the game was on point, was on time, was on target. And then Bo Jackson. Yeah, Bo Jackson. The other name would be Lamar Jackson. And if he ever lines up as a Wildcat player, I'd love for them to call him Lamar Jackson just for that play. Side note, totally something that I was just thinking about this past weekend. But he's a special football player. That's a true freshman that went for 155 on the ground. Really incredible performance. And he could be as special as anyone that's put on those colors. I don't want to say that. Archie Griffin and a couple of those guys, notwithstanding, he can be as special as a number of those guys that have come through at that position. Ezekiel Elliott, Archie Griffin, you have Eddie George, who was at the game day for this one. He's a special player. The stop and start ability is absolutely ridiculous. The first run that he really broke in this football game, I don't know how he got that linebacker to stop, and then he started and accelerated around that corner as fast as I've seen just about ever. He's a remarkable young running back. Obviously wasn't quite ready early in the season against a team like Texas. He's fully ready now, and he's going to be a dangerous player not only going into this offseason, but going forward around there. I think he's going to be the next J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott, these special running backs that come around at Ohio State. He's going to fit right into that group. So they answered those two questions. This game went exactly how Ohio State wanted it to, because the reality is, I think Ohio State wanted to prove that point. I think they wanted to prove that Michigan could come punch them in the face just a little bit and they get right back up and have no problem. Now, I don't know if they wanted to be trailing in this game. I'm sure if Ryan Day had it his way, they would have won 45-0 and that would have been that. But at the end of the day, you proved everyone wrong. You showed that even in a moment where I was sitting there thinking, I don't know, this one's getting a little bit sketchy. Now, 2 field goals on those first 2 drives made me not too bullish on Michigan the rest of the game, but at the end of the day, Ryan Day's a really special individual. I think there's a lot on that guy's shoulders. There has been a lot on that guy's shoulders for since he's taken that job, plain and simple. So many other guys would have shied away from the challenge when they lost to Michigan last year. They would have not coached those guys nearly as hard in the playoff. They would have lost to Oregon or to Texas in that semifinal, and they might have went and found another job. They might have went and gone to the NFL, gotten an OC job, and had probably an easier, less pressure-filled life. This guy wants to be great. He's gone 16-0 since he lost that last game to Michigan, and I don't think he's stopping anytime soon. There's plenty of time to talk about Ohio State and what this means for the CFP, how far above they are from everyone else. Here's what I'll say right now. This team, if they play their A-plus football, they're going to win every game by 10 points. It is fully up for debate whether or not they're going to win. They're going to play their A-plus football. I think they understand the real work just started. They get Indiana this weekend, and then they go to the playoff where they're going to have to win 4 games that are harder than the one they just played. So we'll see what happens with this team. It's not saying they're slam dunk national champion winners, but man, is this team complete. And they're really, really talented, and they're only getting better. It's incredible to watch. Also, before I get out of here, before I get done with this game, shout out to Brutus. Every other mascot in the country should be taking notes of what Brutus did. I feel like we've lost a little of that magic around the mascots outside of Cosmo over there at BYU. Do more of that. Do more of what Brutus did on Saturday. That was absolutely incredible to watch and deserves a lot of respect for that one. But just wanted to get that out of the way. Massive moment for Ohio State. I think they understand that they got bigger goals this season, and I think that's why you saw the postgame play out the way it did. But at the end of the day, Ohio State wins 27-9, ends the drought, and they move on forward to a huge game against Indiana that's been on a collision course for a long time. Alabama escaped, and in a game where they were up 17-0 on what had been an absolutely just disgusting offense, they found a way. And it's a weird thing to say because I'll be totally honest with you. I didn't zone out of this game. I didn't tune out of this game by any means. I pretty much wrote Auburn off. I'll tell you that much. I did not think they were going to be able to score 17 points in general. Not only did they do that, they came back and tied this game at 20. They tied it really late in this football game. And then Alabama makes the call. And Kalen DeBoer makes the call. On your goal at about 5-yard line, 6-yard line, 4th and 2. There's one reason why he made that decision. It's Ty Simpson. You don't make that decision unless you have absolute trust in your quarterback to make the right decision, to throw the ball exactly where it needs to be and put it in the spot that it needs to be. He did exactly that. He threw a perfect ball to the perfect route from Isaiah Horton, and they win this football game on a fumble from Cam Coleman, which could very well be his last play in the Auburn Tigers jersey. I hate to do that to Auburn fans, but we'll see what happens on that one. Hopefully, Alex Golesh can keep that guy around. But at the end of the day, it's onions. It's what we talk about all the time. We talk about basketball shots, but at the end of the day, Kalen DeBoer putting that ball in Ty Simpson's hands in that moment, it's onions. There's no two ways about that. But I have tons of respect for what Ashton Daniels did in this football game. He made mistakes early, especially that pick, but he really played a gutty performance against a defense that was flying around, that was hitting him pretty good. He kept running the ball, kept making plays, and did some really incredible things in this game. With that out of the way, with giving some props to Ashton Daniels, this Auburn 2025 team, it's one of the worst coached football teams I've seen in a very long time. And it's hyperbolic. I'm being aggressive. I get that. DJ Durkin did some incredible things with that defense. There's some incredible players, and not all of it's bad. The amount of unforced errors they make is remarkable to watch. It is one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen, whether it's drops or penalties or just misalignments or just little things where it's remarkable. It's insane how good this team is at losing football games. I've never seen anything like it. Hopefully Auburn can put it in their past, but man, this 2025 football team was really tough to watch because you saw all the talent on the field, you saw them make plays at moments, but when it really matters, they just can't quite do the things that you need them to do. It was incredible. As someone that doesn't much care about Auburn one way or the other, is relatively apathetic, enjoys Auburn, wants them to be good, but at the end of the day, is not an Auburn fan or enemy by any means, it's frustrating to watch for me. I have to imagine it's frustrating to watch for Tigers fans, but regardless, back to Alabama. For me, They're in the CFP. I really don't care what happens in the SEC title game. I'll give my full takes on the CFP tomorrow before the rankings come out, what I think should happen, what I think will happen, all of that good stuff. Bama's into me. I really don't think there's much of a debate there. They won 4 massive ranked games in the middle of the season. Obviously, you lose the close one to Oklahoma. That one's tough, but you bounce back, find your way to the SEC title. Unless they get beat by like 40 points by Georgia, and they're not going to, they should be in. Side note, if they were to leave him out, you leave the SEC runner-up out, Greg Sankey will burn this thing to the ground. Now, I don't love Greg Sankey. I'd probably be right there with him. This would be a very, very bad decision if Alabama was left out of the CFP. But regardless, we can talk about that at another moment. But incredible game, one that always delivers in all of the games, all of the rivalries that really deliver on a yearly basis, whether it's the game or Texas OU or Texas A&M now delivering. This one, every single year, has something that I have never seen before, never thought of, or just absolute abject chaos. This one was no different. So we'll see how Alabama is looked at tomorrow. We'll see what it looks like going into the championship, if they're in regardless. All that stuff we'll talk about tomorrow. But Alabama gets a big win in the Iron Bowl, and that's plenty for a lot of those people down there. Texas upsets Texas A&M 27-17, second year in a row. Well, fourth game in a row? I can't remember. Second year in a row where they've been able to beat Texas A&M. Just a dominating second half from Texas, from both the offense and the defense. Mainly the offense really came alive in the second half. Arch Manning played nearly a perfect second half. Went 6 for 9, I believe, 156, 165 total yards and 2 scores, including that 35-yard touchdown run that was pretty special in a lot of different ways. A lot of lateral quickness and then breakaway speed that not a lot of guys, especially guys with that last name, have. But at the end of the day, Texas won both lines of scrimmage by a pretty comfortable margin. Cassius Howell was a total non-factor in this football game for the first time all year. The Texas run game was a massive factor for the first time all year. Just one of those games where just about everything you know about these two football teams kind of gets inverted, especially in the second half. The first half was a lot of the same for this Texas offense. Arch Manning's box score, as you found pretty much throughout the entire season, if you watched him closely, it does not show how good he played in this football game. Early in the game, it was ugly from this Texas offense. All year, it's been really ugly. The offensive line couldn't protect. They didn't have a run game for him to fall back on. And he made a couple of misses because of all of that. But he was incredible in the second half, and the offensive line was incredible. Trey Wisner, whatever happens to him when he plays Texas A&M or Oklahoma, they need to bottle that and sell it in stores in Texas because it would sell out in a minute. But at the end of the day, Texas A&M really wanted this one. I heard a lot of talk right after this game, not from Texas A&M fans necessarily, but from people at large that, oh, this one didn't matter. Roll off, you'll be fine. You get a home playoff game, and obviously that's a great consolation prize. To go from a bye to getting a home playoff game is not too shabby. They really wanted this one. They haven't beaten Texas in a very long time around there. They do not like Texas at all. I can promise you that. And they wanted to go to their first SEC title game, plain and simple. I think Marcel Reed having an extra week of health might be a little bit of a silver lining in the grand scheme of things because he didn't look fully healthy in the second half. I don't think that changed the outcome in any way, but he didn't look fully healthy after he went down early. Was very worried for a second that was very serious. Sounds like he's going to be okay, but we'll see what happens the rest of the way for this team. I have questions. There's no doubt about that. I think everyone left that game thinking, okay, there's a couple of teams that can probably execute what Texas did. Defensively, there's a couple of teams that won't be able to. The teams that you want to go through, the teams that you will have to go through to win a title can play the game that Texas just played. Ohio State can do what Texas just did. Oregon can do what Texas just did. Alabama can do that. Georgia can do that. I don't think A&M's a real title contender. I think they're a team that can make some stuff happen. I think they can absolutely win their first game, and then we'll see what the matchup looks like in the second game. But as of right now, there's plenty of teams that can do what Texas just did to them. Someone's going to in that playoff format, and I don't see this team as a national title contender. Still a very good team, still a very good season, but not quite all the way there if you're A&M yet. As for the Texas CFP argument, I'll get into it much more tomorrow. We'll break down everything that I think. I think there's a lot of stuff that's worth talking about with that. They're not a playoff team. I've watched just about every snap of this football team the entirety of the year. They've played like a playoff team in maybe 2.5 games at most. They're not a playoff team. There are a lot of implications about this that we can talk about and get into the out-of-conference implications and all the stuff that you've heard from Longhorn fans over the last little bit, but I don't believe they belong in the CFP. I'll leave it there for the time being. Big win for Texas nonetheless. I called it a perfect finish to an imperfect, disappointing season. Just one of those years where things didn't quite go your way. Obviously, you come in as the number one overall team. You want to win a national title. There's no two ways about that. I picked them to win a national title on this show. They're going to be on the outside of the CFP looking in at a lot of their enemies in the CFP. But Aggies go to the CFP. They're in a really good position to host one of those games, and we'll see what happens with this Aggie team. I don't think they'll play as poorly as they did in this football game. I think there's plenty of teams that can do what Texas did to them, and probably someone will along the way. And then finally, Miami and Vanderbilt just handle their business. Miami 38-7 over Pitt. They continue to get the message. A lot of credit to Mario Cristobal for finishing out the season really strong. Obviously, you lose the two in the middle, and that kind of dampens down this thing. Don't know what that means for their playoff hopes. I'll give that take tomorrow as well. But overall, you finish the season stronger than you did a year ago, and you bounce back from a little adversity where I had some big questions if you could. So a lot of respect to them. We'll see what happens with them. Another team, Vanderbilt, wins 45-24 over Tennessee. Tennessee was really in this game because Diego Pavia gave him a couple. He gave him a couple early. Tennessee took advantage, and that was just about it. Vanderbilt totally controlled the second half of this football game. I think Pavia totally locked up his trip to New York City. We'll see about that playoff spot for the Commodores. It is going to be a hotly debated thing. I have my take as well, and I'll give it tomorrow before the rankings come out. But let's take another break here, let's take another break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about just all the other games. We'll get into Georgia Tech. We'll talk about the Egg Bowl briefly, even though a lot has changed since then. We'll talk about Oregon handling Washington, the chaos in the ACC, and we'll give you guys an idea of what conference championships we're staring down this weekend right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the big games from this past weekend. Ohio State ends the drought in the game. Alabama escapes the Iron Bowl, as they often do over there in Jordan-Hare. You got Texas upsetting A&M, not changing too much about the playoff bracket as far as I'm concerned. And Miami and Vanderbilt just trying to get style points and find their way into that 12-team field. But we got to talk about the rest of it. There was a lot of other games that we got to talk about that have some massive implications. And we'll start down here, about 15 minutes up the road from me. Georgia gets a win 16-9 over Georgia Tech. This game was a little bit weird. It was definitely not what a lot of people, including myself, were expecting in this football game. I thought we were going to get an offensive battle. I thought Buster Faulkner was going to be able to do enough to find openings in the Georgia defense. I thought the Georgia offense was going to be able to essentially run all over Georgia Tech, and they did some of that in this football game, but real credit to Blake Giddy and that Georgia Tech defense. They did an incredible job preparing for this group. They tackled incredibly well. E.J. Lightsey played an incredible game against his former team over there at Georgia. Just really, really incredible job from all of that group, but at the end of the day, Nate Frazier and Zachariah Branch, a couple of really, really special players, led Georgia to the finish line here. I have some questions about Gunnar Stockton moving forward. This was maybe his worst game. Definitely his worst game in the last month or so. We'll see what happens with him. I have enough faith in him to bounce back and be fine on Saturday, but definitely some things with this past game that leave a couple more questions. But with A&M's loss, Georgia finds their way back to the SEC title for the 5th time in a row. Insanity. And they get Alabama. You can never escape the inevitable over there in the SEC. Ole Miss handled the Egg Bowl 38-19. A lot of questions about how this team was going to react, all the lane talk, all of that stuff. There was way more drama off the field than there was on it. They handled business very comfortably in this game. There wasn't much of a question about who was winning it from the start to the finish. It was very, very decisive in a lot of ways. Frankly, the craziest part of this entire game happened after the game with what people are calling Hogate, if you will, with that reporter using an unsavory lyric to describe the circumstances around Lane Kiffin. Weird. just a really weird circumstance. It only happens in college football. That is what this sport is. It is weird. It doesn't make any sense. That one made as little sense as I could possibly imagine. But at the end of the day, I guess you're reporting on Pete Golding now. Hopefully he feels okay about that quote. Hopefully you don't use that quote towards him in a couple of years. But at the end of the day, Ole Miss wins this one. I think they're in the CFP no matter what. Another thing that we will touch on tomorrow, I promise you, but I don't think there's much of a question. I think if you got to see them play without Lane Kiffin in the offensive staff and it looked terrible, then maybe you have a conversation there, but you're not going to be able to. So I think they're in there. Do they get a home playoff game? I think is the debate there, and I think there's validity to both sides there. So we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. I'll give my full take, but Ole Miss is in the playoff one way or another regardless to me. Oregon gets a 26-14 win over Washington. They kind of handled their business here. There wasn't much of a question of what was going to happen in this game. It got close there for a second, and then Malik Benson ran like 100 miles an hour. I don't know how he defied 5 or 6 angles in that moment, but he did. It was absolutely incredible to watch. The acceleration on that kid is out of this world. Came over from Alabama a couple of years ago, and without DeCorian Moore, without Evan Stewart, without Gary Bryant Jr., he stepped up in a big moment, made a massive play. They score a touchdown. They put this game fully away. Oregon's in there, and they are dangerous as can be. I was worried about this Oregon team coming into the year. If you had told me they were going to be this, I would have told you were crazy. If you told me they were going to survive injuries on the offensive line, they were going to survive injuries at the wide receiver position, I was going to call you crazy. I'll be totally honest. But they've done that. There is not a team that wants to see Oregon in the CFP, especially if DeCorian Moore comes back, especially if Evan Stewart comes back, because I think people forget just how special of a player that is, and especially if they're fully healthy on the offensive line, which they should be in that home playoff game. It's a scary team, and it's definitely a team that can find their way to the semifinals, maybe even the national title, and maybe get a little bit of revenge on Ohio State from a year ago. But at the end of the day, that's way in the future, a very dangerous Oregon team going into the CFP no matter what. Texas Tech and BYU handled their business. There was a moment where UCF had a little bit of life. That was taken away very, very quickly. But Texas Tech tops West Virginia 49-0. This was a formality, if I'm being totally honest. Even if Texas Tech didn't have the Big 12 title locked up, which they did by the end of this game, they were going to win this game by a lot regardless, and that's exactly what they did. We will talk about my picks for all of these games as they come up. We'll talk about what the games are here in a second, but they rolled. They were going to roll. There wasn't much of a question there. So BYU tops UCF 41-21. Fell down 14-0 in this game. So there was a moment where everyone's ears perked up and thought maybe we get a little bit of craziness. Now, they could have lost the game and still been on their way to Arlington, but that would have taken the CFP at-large bid totally out of the conversation. Another thing that we'll talk about tomorrow with the CFP, because there's plenty of conversation about that. I pretty much have my CFP set in stone, but we'll talk about that later. Virginia Tech just gets rolled by Virginia, just totally handled. Cavaliers just totally handled this game from start to finish. Jamari Taylor's an incredible running back that doesn't get nearly enough respect, but the defense stepped up massive in this game against an offense that you knew was going to run the football. They didn't let him run the football from start to finish. An incredible job by Virginia. You come into a weekend where you know you pretty much have to win to find your way to the ACC title with the logjam that was right behind them. They find a way to win and do it convincingly. And then SMU. SMU falls to Cal 38-35, something that I hate to say, but I saw coming in this weekend. This was the JKS show, and SMU just couldn't overcome it. It was going to happen to a number of teams this year. It happened to a couple of teams a couple of weeks ago when JKS played him. He's an incredible player. He's an incredible young player. A lot of people talking about where he's going to play next. I think you're going to find out he really likes Cal. And I think if they hire Tosh Lupo here pretty soon, which I expect them to do, I don't know if he's going anywhere. We'll talk about that in time, obviously. Plenty of time to talk about the portal. Not right now, that's for sure. But they knocked out SMU from the ACC title. I'm not sure SMU deserved to go to the ACC title, but I know for a fact that the team that I'm about to talk about probably doesn't deserve to be there, but they're there nonetheless. Duke, how'd you pull this one off? It is the weirdest team that I have ever laid my eyes on, maybe since I've started watching college football. They're going to the ACC title. They're a 7-5 football team, and they're going to the ACC title, and the weirdest part about it is they lost to another 6-2 team in Georgia Tech. It's just a really weird system that we got going on where Georgia Tech lost to Pitt, who's also 6-2. It became a logjam, and Duke finds their way out of it. I don't know how. I want to say something right now that I won't get in, or well, I'll get into tomorrow, but I'm going to say it right now. They should have no chance to get to the CFP. Plain and simple. There's no shot. I don't care what Duke does this weekend. They should not be in the CFP. You can't lose to UConn. You can't get rolled by Illinois. You can't lose to teams within your conference that are not playing in the ACC championship and expect to go to the CFP. If they make it, I will lose my mind. I really do mean that. All due respect to Manny Diaz and this group. They've done a great job. They deserve to go there. Anyone saying they should put Miami in because they like Miami more, give me a break. Duke deserves to be there, but they do not deserve to go to the CFP if they win this football game. We'll see what happens. Obviously going to be a very interesting one, but this Duke team is going to find a way to play in the ACC title, and if they do win and if they somehow go to the CFP, that'll be a 5-loss team lining up to play in the CFP. Not what people expected. I don't think what Duke fans expected after they took that loss to UConn, but here we are. At the end of it all, Duke finds their way to the ACC title. Over in the group of 6, Tulane handled business against Charlotte, punched their ticket to the American title, where they will face off against North Texas, who handled their business this past weekend. No real drama there. They went about their business, and those will be the two that will be facing off. Navy did get a massive win over Memphis, but didn't end up making a difference there. JMU dominates Coastal Carolina, gets a couple more style points, but got to beat Troy this upcoming weekend. Troy tops Southern Miss 28-18. Massive one there. If JMU wins that football game and Duke wins, I think they're firmly in. I think JMU should probably be in regardless, but again, discussion for another day. Jacksonville State top Western Kentucky, which means it's going to be Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State in that Conference USA matchup. Really fun one over there. And New Mexico beat San Diego State and threw the entire Mountain West into a blender. I'll show you what they came out with here in a second. It's neither of those football teams. But Washington State also handles Oregon State. Just cut that trophy right down the middle over there in the Pac-2, and we'll see what happens. We'll let those two just have half a trophy for the rest of time. Very weird season for those two teams, but you've come to an end, and you got some teams joining you here pretty soon. But the conference championships that we get to get into tomorrow. We'll talk about the schedule here in a second, but these are the conference championships we got coming up. SEC, it's Alabama, Georgia. Imagine that. It's going to be Alabama, Georgia at the end of this thing in the SEC over there in Atlanta, about 10 minutes down the road from me. Big Ten, the collision course. Ohio State versus Indiana. Cannot wait for that game to unfold. Going to be an incredible one. Big 12, again, kind of a collision course for much of the season. Texas Tech versus BYU. Both teams still on the table. If they lose this game to get into the CFP, we'll talk about it tomorrow. ACC, Virginia versus Duke. If you had that picked in the preseason, bless you. I don't know how you did that, but you found a way to pick the weirdest conference that I've seen in a very long time. You picked the right two. I can't imagine there are many people out there that did that. I don't know if there is one that picked that. Over there in the group of 5, the American, it's going to be North Texas at Tulane. A lot of these are home games for the higher ranked teams, so something to keep in mind there. Troy is actually at JMU, so apologies for that. Troy will play over there in Harrisonburg. Great game over there in the Sun Belt. Will have a lot to do with what the CFP looks like. Mountain West, UNLV at Boise State. So New Mexico and San Diego State get boxed out. I don't know how they go about their business. I would have loved to see Jason Eck in this football game, but at the end of the day, UNLV will play Boise State in that one. Over in the Conference USA, Kennesaw State with Jerry Mack doing an incredible job in his very first year. They're going to play against Jacksonville State. Over there in Jacksonville, it's going to be an incredible, Jacksonville, Alabama. It's going to be an incredible matchup over there. And then the MAC, this is the one that gets the neutral site over there in Ford Field up there in Detroit. Miami of Ohio against Western Kentucky. That's entirely wrong. Western Michigan in the MAC. I totally apologize. Western Michigan is going to play Miami of Ohio over there in Detroit at the end of this weekend for the MAC championship, a special conference. There's no doubt about that every single year. The MAC is a really, really fun one. This one was no different, and it'll be Miami of Ohio against Western Michigan for that championship at the end of it all. But it was an incredible weekend. It's one of those weekends that everyone, as we've gotten further on into this college football expansion, the playoff, and all of that stuff, people have kind of tried to dampen down this weekend. They've tried to tell you that it doesn't matter, and yes, the Texas A&M result is likely not going to change what the CFP looks like in terms of the teams inside of it. Those guys cared. There's no doubt about that. The guys over there in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they cared about where their feet were. They didn't care about what the CFP implications were. They didn't care about all that stuff. All that stuff obviously matters to these kids. But a little bit of hate matters too. And I promise you, that was on full display this past weekend. We got a couple of brawls. We got a Michigan player headbutting a ref, which he was very lucky to stay in that football game. We got rivalry weekend. And I think a lot of times we have to remind ourselves that when they get in between those white lines, those guys are competitors and they're going to get after each other. And there's a little bit of hate late in the season that with the playoff, with all of that stuff, even that with all of that baked in, it's still going to be downright special. And it was special this past weekend. I'm sure it'll be special next year and going forward, regardless of what the postseason looks like. Just feel like we have to remind people of that every now and then because you get a little bit down in the dumps about where this sport is. If you watched Saturday and came away saying it doesn't matter to those players, I don't know what to tell you. It absolutely does, and that was on full display this past Saturday. But thank you so much for tuning into this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. So we're going to do the same thing we did last week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm going out of town Thursday. I'm going up to Washington, D.C. to hang out with some friends. So I will be doing tomorrow, doing all my picks. On Wednesday, reacting to the college football playoff rankings, kind of doing a couple of predictions myself, maybe predicting the playoff at the end of this weekend. All of that good stuff will be coming the next couple of days. But we got a show coming for you tomorrow where we'll pick all of the conference championship games. We'll get into all the hypotheticals as we head into the conference or the CFP rankings. All of that stuff coming for you tomorrow. And then we'll close out the weekend with a myriad of different stuff on Wednesday. But just wanted to make sure everyone knew. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next show. But thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It means the absolute world to me. Feel like we're having quite a bit of fun over here. So please do join us. It's an incredible time, man. Like, subscribe, comment, do all that great stuff. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you guys tomorrow for some championship picks.